Welcome back into the Fantasy Sanctuary. It is another best ball stream because it is best ball season. I'm joined by Colm Kelly of Rotoviz, co-host of Rotoviz Overtime with Sean Siegel, the man making so many other great podcasts sound smooth and crisp. Runner-up in FFPC's best ball tournament a couple of years ago, just missing out on that top prize. Colm, this feels like our time of year, this best ball season. How's it treating you?
It's treating me good so far, and it certainly is best ball season. Bittersweet that second place finish, so close, but yeah, fun times. A couple 2 seasons ago now, so we'll see what we can do in 2023. That's where our outlook is. But I'm really looking forward to drafting here with you today. But yeah, best ball season. Best ball is growing at an epic rate. So very exciting times in the fantasy world.
Yeah, it's just, it's completely crazy when you think about like right now there's over $35 million in prizes available between sort of Underdog, FFPC, drafters and Draftkings. So you tend to spread most of your drafts between co-drafting on Underdog with your Rotoviz hosts and FFPC typically because, much like snakes, there's no Draftkings in Ireland. Tonight we're going to get you into the Draftkings streets for the first time, but how do you find it flipping between the different scorings and settings with best ball?
Love it. One of the things that we talk about on Rotoviz Overtime quite a bit is, whether it's Dynasty or best ball or redraft, whatever format you're playing, and even in DFS, it's working all those different kind of muscles in your brain, to work through the different implications for the different scoring settings, different roster constructions, and so on. So I really think that it really sharpens your skills as a drafter to play in different rooms, to play in different scoring settings, so to play on different sites. And you mentioned I kind of have a cheat code for these underdog drafts, so I can sneak my way in through the back door, I guess we'll say, and see how things play out. And then the FFPC, I love playing over there. As you mentioned, we've had a lot of success over on the FFPC side of things, but love the tight end premium format again, adding that other wrinkle. And I know I drafted this week and you were involved in one of the other teams, so I love getting into those challenging rooms. That's one thing that it's a little bit trickier to do, obviously, with Underdog, where a bit like DraftKings, it's fills up and that's the draft. But when you're drafting over at the FFPC, it kind of takes a little bit longer to fill up in those leagues, but it means that you can jump into some rooms that other people are getting into, and that can feel a little bit negative EV because who you're drafting against, and the competition is going to be really strict, but it also leads to fun times and again challenging decisions to make while you're on the clock.
Yeah, we've got a lot of smart people in the chat here. Shout out to Frank, shout out to Fantasy Football Garage, one of my favorite YouTube channels that's coming up. Deft Angel, who's normally lurking in our drafts, and Michael Heary, who was also in the Rotoviz Overtime listener league that we drafted Sunday, which was a super flex one, which was a lot of fun. And I'd urge everyone to go and check out the podcast that you and Sean are putting out about that draft. I definitely wasn't tilted by you guys taking Kyle Pitts one pick ahead of me.
we were drafting back to back in that, and if I'm right in that draft, you then did go tight end to you took Goddard, and that was somebody who we had talked a bit like we have set up a little bit of a draft board here for ourselves tonight to kind of be on a similar page. Myself and Sean talked about the possibility of getting a real value on Goddard potentially in the next round or the round after was our pre-draft conversations, and luckily we took Pitts, because if we didn't, you would have took him, and Goddard was gone then as well because you did take him. Shout out to Frank Duffy, who you mentioned there. This is a plug as well for the expo coming up here over in London in a couple of weeks' time that I'll be attending. I'll be doing a best ball panel with Tom, so really looking forward to that. But I got to meet up with Frank when I was out at the FF Expo out in Canton last year, and actually did the Hall of Fame tour with Frank while he was drafting some best ball teams over at the FFPC. We were talking through some decisions. So I do think Frank, if he remembers back, I was correct on the Zach Ertz not being the tight end to draft last year.
Well, last year's draft board compared to this year, it feels very different. And you're a man who definitely has a taste for zero RB drafts, but this year, we're seeing the running back landscapes change so much. How are you feeling as somebody who is kind of drawn to those wide receiver heavy starts quite often? Are you still drafting zero RB, or are you just finding the running back values too good to pass up at the minute?
I think the key as well, I guess, with zero RB is when we look at the strategy in general, obviously the conversation is not usually taking a running back in those opening 4 rounds, but it's also paired with the philosophies and the strategies of what you need to do to kind of maximize that team, not just what you do in the first couple of picks. So I guess this year, the principles are all still in play. But the part I think is interesting with a lot of the drafts that I've done this year in best ball is if you think of a hero RB build, usually you're looking at that running back in the first round or the second round. I do think this year in that third round and second round range, there is a lot of running back options that are really interesting and hard to pass up, the likes of Jonathan Taylor, even Saquon Barkley, and then I really like Ramondre Stevenson and Breece Hall. So I kind of am in a lot of drafts tempted by those guys if the wide receivers I'm looking at aren't there. So, for example, like I'm more looking if I can get through those opening 6 rounds and have at least 4 wide receivers and possibly having 5 if there's one running back in there. I think that's the way to play it. I do think that people are becoming smarter drafters every year. And because, again, people have always said that your RB hasn't won any major contests, it doesn't work on the grand scheme. Then last year we see it underdog. Not exactly as your RB winning the final weeks of the tournament, but King Cap had the team that won the regular season as your RB team. So there's a lot of people now buying into those philosophies, and even people for years that I have interacted with on Twitter that are in the industry that have been very much take your running backs early. You can even see those people and that's, again, there's success, but there's also information being shared more and more, whether it's Twitter, whether it's in articles, and we're seeing different pieces kind of change the, I guess, zeitgeist of the fantasy football space. But Sean has talked very heavily on Rotoviz Overtime this year that there's always changes. And in the past, when people have gone to the wide receiver heavy side of things, wide receiver kind of crashed. And we could see something similar happen this year. I hope it doesn't. But, there could be a big swing again. If it was a case this year that the first round wide receivers get injured, for example, and don't perform, say Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase bust this year with injuries, for example, well, then you're into a situation where people are saying wide receivers in the first round don't work. The win rate for wide receivers in the first round are terrible. And it kind of will circle around. So all the same principles still in play. And really then you're also targeting all the same profiles that we like to draft, those young players who are ascending. Again, when we look at the draft boards from last year, the players you're looking to be getting now this year are the players that are going to be in those first 3 rounds in 2024. You want to be getting those guys in the 6th, 7th, 8th rounds now, where they're pushed up the likes of Ramondre Stevenson. Even, for example, last year we had Jalen Hurts with the big breakout season. You're kind of looking at those potential options. And I think that's the key, is using the core concepts of zero RB. But I definitely still think full-on zero RB rosters can be drafted. That draft we talked about in the Superflex draft, the last 6 rounds, we drafted 5 running backs and that. So there's going to be running back targets there, but there's some interesting options in the kind of, I would say, top 4 rounds this year.
Yeah, definitely. And if you're here, check out in the comments. There's a link to a video on Hero RB I did recently. It's 15 minutes long, goes into loads of different strategy talk on it and about how we can look to take some of those characteristics of Hero RB and just flip it and build slightly differently. We've got all that.
I do think, to interrupt you, I do think that some of the stuff, when people hear names, for example, or people hear a strategy name, zero RB, Hero RB, it's the concept of what you're doing. That anchor, I think, and that's where I think rather than hero, anchor still makes more sense. Hero caught on, but I think anchor makes more sense because that anchor running back is basically your first starting running back, and that can be in any round. But realistically, if it's in the 10th round, it probably isn't an anchor.
Yeah. So we've got all our folk here saying he loves the show. We love you for being here. We've got Phil back as normal. Looking forward to another episode. And we've got Rich in the chat. We're going to dive into a draft in just a couple of minutes. But before we do, Colm, I mentioned it at the top. You edit a lot of podcasts for a variety of different fantasy platforms. Do you ever feel like you hear too many different opinions on different players? Do you feel like, because I know for some fantasy players, like we're at such a point where there's so many fantastic podcasts and streams out there that it's easy to feel a little overwhelmed sometimes. Do you ever feel like you need to streamline whose opinions you're really just letting steer you on players?
You could get me into trouble with the questions you're asking here, but in terms of like, I got into podcasting because I pretty much became a podcast addict. So, there was no NFL coverage really then with the UK games. It all started to grow. There was more and more, and now there's more than ever. But back in the day, like I remember, the Ross Tucker podcast was one of my first big go-tos back in the day, and I binged and binged and binged. what happened then is, like you're saying, it got to a point where I was just listening to every fantasy podcast I got. It's hard to imagine that, 10 years ago, there wasn't as many fantasy podcasts as there is now. So obviously there was a less, and then when it grew and grew and grew, you couldn't keep up with everything. So what I have done over probably the last 4 or 5 years is I pick the things basically that I'm doing. Like I'll be honest, I listen to Stealing Bananas from Ben Gretsch and Sean Siegel. I listen to a lot of Peter Overzet and Pat Curry and stuff. But again, it's kind of, and I'm not saying this to be in a bubble, it's a lot of the same stuff that I'm doing with the Rotoviz, a lot of the same community, people who have come from that background. And when I'm listening to other stuff, I will pick up on bits and pieces, but a lot of it, when I'm doing it for the work purposes, is for the audio level, the audio quality, rather than trying to take each and every. I don't have a notebook with me for the notes as I'm doing it. So very much have tried to pare back the amount of stuff that I am consuming to, keep the things up with what your own thoughts are, and not let it kind of get mixed up too much. So that will be my thing. It's the same on Twitter. I find it very easy. If there's something that I don't agree with, to scroll past it. I don't have to get into an argument. So it's kind of, consume what you have to consume, but not for content wise. I'm very much kind of set in my own lane.
Okay, so we're going to jump into a draft in just a minute, but before we do, 85% of the people watching this channel in the last 28 days have not subscribed. We are getting so close to 850, and when we get there, one subscriber is going to co-draft a $35 FFPC Best Ball Superflex team with me. All you need to do, hit that subscribe button below, DM us a screenshot on Twitter, and you'll be entered into it. And we are closing in fast, 40 away from it. And I know that we're going to get another 10 at least here tonight. So, Colm, we'll jump into the DraftKings and just the lobby and hit enter, see where we get with that. So we've got 5 of 12, so 7 spaces if you're in the chat and waiting to jump in with us. Colm, I don't know how much you know about this contest, but it is $1 million to first. Basically, it's got quite a good payout structure in terms of, let me see.
Are we splitting it here if we win? Are we splitting it? 50-50?
Oh, of course, straight down the middle. You can buy me a pint of Guinness at the UK FFC. So we're going to be picking 7th, but let me just jump back over there. So I've got here, it's 1 million up top, but if you finish inside the top 10, it's 100K or more. If you finish inside the top 100, it's 10K or more. But the final for this contest is 1,400 people. So I know that's much larger than over on Underdog, which is 400 people. On FFPC, they're much smaller finals. So, yeah, we're going to be trying to beat 1,400 people to win in week 17. Do you think that really just pushes the kind of week 17 correlation stuff?
I think it does. Obviously, you still have to get there, but it really makes that important. The other part that, you might even need to get a little bit weirder with your stacks and correlations, because you're into week 17 and, people are going to have we may draft these players, but, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase stacks, for example, aren't going to be the difference maker unless something happens that your team progresses, and a lot of them teams have got knocked out in week 16, which can happen, but it's probably not going to be the way. So it's a case, I think, of maybe having the wide receiver tree with the quarterback, if it's an elite quarterback, adding in those additional side pieces, the likes of a Tyler Boyd and that sort of an instance. So I think you have to be quite unique, and it'll be interesting because even being unique, maybe that the team doesn't have stacks. That you can galaxy brain it, but that could be a case to pull around.
Yeah, last year's team that won it was a Hero RB build with Christian McCaffrey, and then they took no other running backs until Kenneth Gainwell. They had 4 QBs total. They had a Russell Wilson skinny stack with, I think it was Jerry Jeudy. Then they had 4 Eagles players, but no Jalen Hurts. And they had Jordan Love, who gave them zeros all season practically. It was a very weird team that then took advantage of correlation. I believe if the Buffalo and Bengals game had actually finished, they possibly wouldn't have won that. But so we're going to be picking at 7th. Let us know if you're in the chat and you're also in this draft. Recognize a few people. We've got Deft Angel picking 1 pick behind us. Michael Heary, who does some great data visualization stuff. We've established a run, picking at 12. I'm sure he's picked at 12 on every single one of the drafts we've done together. So I've got the Spike Week tools here. You can kind of see my exposures to these players. And with us picking at 7, who stands out to you, Colm, in this first round?
Well, I'm just pulling up my ADP here as we're setting, and I'm getting it on the screen so I can see what we're doing here. So we are in a situation. This is a tricky area of the draft once those top guys are gone. I'm kind of not as in on the veteran wide receivers this year. So at this point, and I know you kind of mentioned that you're a little bit out in Austin Eckler, but I might be in the CD Lamb territory here. I don't know how far down you want to go, though. He may come back.
I'd be fine jumping down as far as CD Lamb if you want to do him ahead of Austin Eckler.
Yeah, let's do Lamb just for the fun of it here.
Okay, and of course, DraftKings have their new draft board, which they built especially so that Colm would be used to a draft board when we got these, which is making life a little bit easier. And I do think there's something in taking CD Lamb at a position like this because it gets so easy to end up in just pick 10, 11, 12, taking CD Lamb and then putting him with Amon-Ra St. Brown for that kind of week 17 correlation. And after a while, you just feel like a lot of your builds end up being the same. Like last year, I remember the point where I had a lot of Christian McCaffrey, T. Higgins starts when I was starting from the 101, and you hit a point where you just feel like you have to diversify. So at least from here, it potentially gives us a chance to fall onto some other players. See Bijan Robinson going over 111. There was a point where he was creeping up as high as the 1.6 when DraftKings opened not long after the draft, but he's kind of pushed back behind Austin Eckler now. Are you drafting a lot of Bijan Robinson? I find myself I just can't stop.
I haven't had many late round draft slots this year. I've been fortunate enough they've kind of been in that top 8, so it's a case that at the ADP I have other players like CD Lamb, as you've seen there, that I'm willing to take. I find it'll be interesting here now. Like, see the likes of Amon-Ra St. Brown, Michael's taken in there, and Waddle. Those are two players, I'd be kind of hoping that will be coming back in this round, which makes it interesting. We could potentially be getting into that conversation in a second around some of the running back options, but I think we might be leading into. It's always complicated when you don't know if people are listening. I'm on this pick between Wilson and Taylor, and I'd probably lean Taylor in this selection. I'll let you make the call as to which one you want to go.
So Devonta Adams went to pick ahead of us to Deft Angel, who was in the chat earlier. I don't know if he's still there. I haven't found myself taking a lot of Jonathan Taylor. I'm at like 6% on both Wilson and Taylor. I'm happy enough to just take Jonathan Taylor here and kind of call him our, anchor RB, and then see.
Well, if you're not taking much of Mal, go in and say it here. I think Jonathan Taylor's ADP is ludicrous. I think it's insane, and I think it's completely wrong. And he has gone in this draft as the running back 6. Are we at?
Yep.
So running back 6. Why is Jonathan Taylor going behind Derrick Henry? Why?
Yeah.
He really should be at minimum in the back end of that first round.
Yeah, I think typically I've seen Derrick Henry go towards the back half of round 2 rather than the front half of round 2. Yeah. And typically Jonathan Taylor, he's sometimes creeping ahead of Saquon, sometimes after Saquon. But
I'm very interested in Bijan. But basically what Bijan Robinson could be this year is what Jonathan Taylor already has shown us that he is. And he's also, I would say, probably going to be in a... Well, actually, I was about to say in a better offense. I'm quite enthusiastic about Atlanta, so we'll talk more about Atlanta probably as we go through it. But I do think that, he is the best running back to come into the NFL over the last probably... since he was drafted anyway. I would say Christian McCaffrey is still better than him. But, in terms of why are we looking at him in the mid-second, I just think that's a little bit out.
I think the main reason that I hear from people is the pass-catching concern, which is real with dual threats. I think, you can definitely see a world where he already didn't have the highest ceiling in the passing game. But for me, I look back at his red zone efficiency numbers, and he's never been terribly efficient in the red zone.
But he's also played in an offense that the quarterbacks have been abysmal, and that's what I was going to say. Run the ball.
The upside case is definitely that he becomes more efficient because Anthony Richardson makes life much easier for him like that. So we've got a couple of questions in the chat, but we'll get to in a minute. But we're 2 picks away. Ramondre Stevenson, Mark Andrews, Breece Hall, Calvin Ridley, Lamar Jackson, Travis Etienne, and Deebo Samuel. I know you're kind of out on Calvin Ridley at cost. He's somebody I've taken a bit of, but not huge amounts. Anybody standing out for you?
I really like both running back options here. I know you're a Ravens fan, so if you want to pitch in for Mark Andrews and get an elite tight end, but I like Hall here, and the other running back has just gone off the board. That was Stevenson. So the conversation we were having a moment ago and taking Taylor, I don't really want to have 2 running backs here, but I could go 2 running backs here, and then running backs are not going to be seen for a long time here, Tom.
Yeah, I think, well, Joe Burrow goes there in a bit of an unexpected move. I'm quite happy that I will definitely be getting my Ravens exposure in plenty of other drafts this season. And I think Breece Hall's one of the clearest players who's going to increase in value between now and sort of September. So
I think he's going to be the kind of version of Saquon Barkley last year. This time last year, Saquon Barkley was going a lot later, kept pushing up draft boards. So I think we'll be holding off on running back, but the upside of both of those guys, I think, is huge.
Yeah, so we've got a question from Phil here in the chat who's picking at number 5. I never know whether lean Cup or Hill there, so tend to just mix it up. Who do you guys prefer? And then he did get Stevenson and Chubb, 2 running backs that I've been drafting plenty of. I've kind of lent towards Cup because I feel like his ceiling really is the wide receiver 1 overall. Last year, even when things were terrible with the Rams, he was the wide receiver 2 in points per game. And I'm kind of at a point now where I'm trying to adjust slightly because I feel like I have slightly too much Cooper Kupp at like 25% exposure. How about you, Colm? Is there one of them you've been more drawn to?
I mentioned in a comment, and people might have been wondering, the veteran wide receivers in the first round, the likes of Kupp, Hill, Diggs, Devontae Adams, those kind of players in that range. I'm kind of out on those guys, not completely, but at the ADPs, I would much rather have the younger guys like Lamb, Brown, St. Brown, Waddle. Waddle, though, like for example, as much as I like him going at the 2-1 and Hill going at the 1-6, I think like that's still both like I would rather Waddle be in the 3rd round, and then I would take Waddle every day, if that makes sense. I would lean Hill out of the 2 of them. I just have quite a bit of concern around Matthew Stafford, and quarterbacks used to fall off cliffs at the end of their career, and now we're in a situation. I know we're on the clock, so I'm happy to go with either TJ Hawkinson or Jerry Jeudy here. Which one do you want?
Let's go with TJ Hawkinson. I haven't drafted him at all, and he was somebody I really liked last season, so I'm completely fine with it. I think as long as we get to 5 wide receivers by round 10, things are kind of fine on DraftKings. It's the way that players earn bonuses over here, you can make up some of that difference. So just gonna scroll back
with Hawkinson too. I would have I'm happy with Hawkinson. Would be very interested in Jeudy in that range again. Basically, you're talking about it would have been 2 and 2 then, but it is a case that in these next kind of 3 picks, we would have wanted to go tight end. I would have been looking for a Pitts or a Goddard. So for Hawkinson to be there and it to be a 1v1 with him and Jeudy, I think that's a fair move to make. But the veteran players, I think, are just a little bit overvalued this year. Like Amari Cooper at the 312, I think is a price that I wouldn't want to pay. I do understand that Hopkins could have a good landing spot, could be with the Chiefs or the Bills, would be these big explosions that people are hoping to have.
Yeah.
But at a free agent at the 4-9 is a little bit tricky for me. Christian Kirk, and you mentioned Calvin Ridley, but Christian Kirk, Calvin Ridley are going within those picks. I love Trevor Lawrence, but I don't know. He's supporting both of them. Ridley missed the last season that he played, a large chunk through injury. Then he missed all of last season. There's a lot of things happening in that offense that are hard to call. But the veteran wide receivers, I think I would rank them Tyreek Hill, then Cooper Kupp, then Diggs, then Adams. But like the ascending younger players is kind of what people will notice here as we draft this team.
So we're a couple of picks away, but shout out to Chris who drafted from 4 spots, saw username when the draft started, jumped straight on the stream to find us. Make sure you're subscribed already if you're not. So we'll be coming back up, and like you say, we've kind of gone with an anchor wide receiver approach here, which it's definitely pushing the sort of boundaries of how many wide receivers I'd want through 4 rounds. So it kind of feels like we've got to be looking at wide receiver here. Christian Watson, Chris Godwin, Marquise Brown, and then you kind of get down to Kadarius Toney at pick 64 onwards, which feels like, yeah. So we've got Chris Godwin or Marquise Brown with the next up on ADP.
Chris Godwin.
Yeah,
no doubt in my mind.
That's absolutely fine by me. I think he's somebody that it's very easy to imagine, even with Baker Mayfield, Chris Godwin being fantasy relevant, and it probably being more difficult for Mike Evans. Michael in the chat has a question. It'd be interested in you guys' take on Olave. I can never get him due to my usual drafting spot at the back, and he's one I really wish I was able to get more. I find I've barely drafted any Olave because, I've had a lot of picks in the mid-range, and I've had quite a few picks lately at the back, so I really haven't ended up with him. What about yourself, Colm?
There's some players, and we just drafted Chris Godwin, but there's some players, even Drake London, like the players that went in that last run, Christian Watson, Drake London, Chris Godwin. I do think that there's players significantly discounted based on who their quarterback is. I think if we had a better quarterback, and Derek Carr is sufficient, but I think there's question marks around who his quarterback is. Olave had a great rookie season, and I think he's going to step forward. Most players take that leap from year 1 to year 2. You look at Gareth Wilson. He now has Aaron Rodgers, so there's less quarterback questions. But is Rodgers able to do what he did 2 years ago? We'll find out very soon. But I love Olave, and in terms of when I'm talking about Adams and some of those other veterans, I would have Olave right in that tier, and because of his age, I'd probably start nudging him a little bit forward ahead of that. Like, we're looking at quarterback, and I know he's the quarterback for Devontae Adams last year, but would you rather have Garoppolo or Carr? I think that's pretty close, and then both of those guys are playing with them this year, so we'll see what happens. I like Olave.
So we're about to be back up here, and if we wanted to carry on pushing wide receiver and try to bull that out a bit, it's Tyler Lockett, Brandon Ayuk, Mike Evans. I haven't drafted very much Brandon Ayuk a year after drafting horrendous amounts of him, believing that him and Trey Lance were exactly what you needed. Is he somebody you'd like to go with here? I mean, I can filter down the wide receivers so we can see that it's,
How interested are you in going with that ugly route there that you mentioned a minute ago with Baker Mayfield later on and stacking up the Buccaneers here?
I think I can definitely be persuaded that that's the route to go, because I think there is definitely, even if we didn't end up with one of the quarterbacks from the Buccaneers and we just take, we've got Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, that could be an awful lot of points in this format where you get bonuses for 100 yards, you get bonuses for catches. So
I would expect that offense to be extremely condensed.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the options that we have, I don't feel like Brandon Ayuk is necessarily a better wide receiver than Mike Evans. I think it's kind of like, a bet on talent decision. We've got a couple of pure zero RB teams in here at both the beginning and the end of this draft, picks 1 and 12. Any of those that really stand out as builds which you really like, Colm?
Well, I did mention earlier, I don't like Amari Cooper, and I'm not drafting Amari Cooper. Like, he's a player that I would look, this could come back and bite me. 0% exposure. I did a video last year on being completely out in Amari Cooper, and there was some weeks where that looked like a terrible decision, and there was some weeks where it looked like he didn't know how to play football anymore. So there's, a balance between it. But Amon-Ra, Jalen Waddle, Jackson, Deontay Johnson, and then Kyle Pitts, love everything else about it. If we were looking at that roster, I'm just looking at the other options. Even if it was a Keenan Allen, would be all aboard that team. The Jefferson, Olave, Devontae Smith. I'm not as in on Mike Williams this year as I have in previous years. It just hasn't been. He hasn't been able to put it together outside of that kind of one stretch 2 seasons ago, but he has stacked him up with Herbert. I'm also not as sold on Herbert as a lot of people are, than James Conner and Addison. So it's an interesting team, and I'm always interested to see when these teams start out, how they start and then how they finish up, because I do think this is the point where you could have a nice 0 RB start, and I think people can lose the run of the draft, and panic a little bit on how to get their running backs and things. So we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, so we're a couple of picks away. In the chat, Rich has asked, with 2 RBs this early, how many RBs would you traditionally be looking to roster? On DraftKings, because it's 20 picks overall, I think typically I'm looking at 5. You can push 4 if you end up with a couple more around rounds 8 to 10. But we're back on, and Treylon Burks, Gabe Davis, the top wide receivers, Brandon Cooks.
Dotson for me is the pick here, but Dotson.
Dotson.
Are you okay with that? Yeah.
Yeah, completely fine with that one.
Like Burks as well, and I've loved Gabe Davis in the past, but again, it just hasn't worked out at the moment. So it's a little bit tricky. There's only so much you can have full belief in the talent, and I still have belief in the talent, but it just there's too many signs. And if we kind of take that little playoff stretch out of it, the game against the Chiefs, there hasn't been as much to get excited about over the last couple of years for him.
Yeah, I think he's somebody who could climb around or so if DeAndre Hopkins signs elsewhere. I think there's still a little bit of worry in some people.
I think if Hopkins signs there, that ADP just will plummet.
Oh, exactly. It goes one way or the other, doesn't it?
And we'll see that no matter where he signs, and probably similar with Dalvin Cook, wherever he signs, I think we're going to see whoever the players are there have a crater in their ADP.
Yeah. But in terms of our draft now, we're through 7 rounds. We've got CeeDee Lamb, Jonathan Taylor, Breece Hall, TJ Hawkinson, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, and Jahan Dotson. So even after we only had 1 wide receiver through 4 rounds, it still feels pretty healthy by this point in the draft. Do you feel comfortable with where we're at?
I feel comfortable now. Once get them 3 wide receivers in a row, but that was always my intention.
Yeah,
and I think it is a case of kind of knowing something that I mentioned a lot in podcasts is like drafting from back to front. So being a case that what players are going to be available a couple of rounds ahead, and if you have 2 running backs early, how do you balance out which players are going to be available in the 9th, 10th round? Because that's usually where you're looking at the 0 RB candidates. So are you moving on now to find wide receivers in there? Can you find a quarterback in there? You kind of just need to know how things will pair together. So yeah, I'm comfortable. And the question that was asked there, I think we're in 4, potentially 5 at the running back position. But again, if we get into those later rounds and there's some interesting, high upside running backs available, I think, you could potentially add in 1 more. But I think 5, the more you invest early, the less usually that you'll have on the roster.
Yeah, so we're 1 pick away now. At the top of things, it's Isaiah Pacheco, Evan Ingram, a couple of quarterbacks there. Then you got Mike Thomas, Javonte Williams. So I'd lean towards Dak here for the stack. Is that something you'd be happy with, Colm?
Do I sound like I want it? My pick here, if we want to go all out on wide receivers, would be Elijah Moore.
Well, let's do that, and then perhaps something okay will come back to us. I've been taking a bit of Elijah Moore lately, and even though I listened to a podcast recently where Pat Kerrane said perhaps Elijah Moore just isn't good, the upside case of him in this format where he could be catching 7 balls or so in a game and giving you real explosive weeks is something that I'm happy to bet on. It gives us a little week 17 correlation with the Jets who play in Cleveland then, and perhaps that's an ugly game and there's a lot of close to the line of scrimmage passes.
I joked a lot last year about some of the week 17 games that we had been drafting a lot of players. We drafted a lot of Lions, Seahawks, Jets, and those teams turned out to be a lot better than people were expecting. So we'll see. I have a lot of concerns about Deshaun Watson, both on and off the pitch, I guess. But I think it could be interesting. I mentioned the Cooper case. I'm going to be drafting a lot of Elijah Moore this year. He may just not be good, but I also think there's a lot of untapped potential there. Last year was just a train wreck for him, whatever happened. Came on a little bit down the stretch. So I think Elijah Moore is very interesting. How do you feel about Dak Prescott? I'm just not as enthusiastic about the upside of Prescott in terms of when I'm looking at a lot of these players, I'm trying to see if you're buying in at some of these prices. I'm thinking, which of these guys is going in the top 5 rounds next year? Who is taking Lamar Jackson's spot? Who's taking Joe Burrow's spot? Who is up in that range? And I just don't know I think we know what Dak Prescott is. Very good. No, I'll say good, but not going to jump into that elite tier at any point.
No, but I think at this point in the draft, we're kind of past that elite tier. I mean, we've gone past Deshaun Watson, we've gone past Anthony Richardson.
We haven't got to Baker Mayfield yet.
But okay, so Dak does go a few picks before us. It goes unstacked to the team at pick 2.
I thought it was interesting as well. The drafter in spot 2 took Higgins and Chase, but paired him with Josh Allen.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's week 17 correlation, so
it
perhaps
is,
that's
but
what you need.
It could be, but the likelihood is that you want them, paired together.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
We're one pick away, and then I guess if we did want to go quarterback, we could take Kirk Cousins to stack him with TJ Hawkinson, or there's Brian Robinson, David Njoku, Zay Flowers, Alan Lazard, if you want to build out that week 17 correlation a bit more, or what are you feeling, Colm?
If you want, I'll go with Cousins here.
Well, let's go with Cousins because I feel like
we'll go with Cousins. I'm never excited about Cousins, and when I was comparing which player I thought basically Dak Prescott was, and I'm sorry to the Cowboys fans out there, but when I'm thinking about who that quarterback is, it's Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins is similar to what Andy Dalton was, good NFL quarterback, but never going to be at that elite tier. And I would rather, this is what I often do in those situations when you make a decision where you pass on Dak Prescott, for example, I would rather have Elijah Moore and Kirk Cousins than Dak Prescott and the other available options, because at that point it did become extremely flat and there was not many exciting options to draft. So out of the quarterbacks that went there, Daniel Jones is somebody who I'm interested in this year, and Tua. But I always like to have a quarterback, and ideally 2 quarterbacks in the quarterback window. But with how we set this up, I think we go with Cousins and probably hold all the way off to Mayfield. I can't see anyone else wanting to draft him based on how we've set up this team. But how do you feel? Would you have went Prescott over Moore there?
I think I possibly would have gone Prescott over Moore, thinking that I might have got one of Rashad Bateman or Zay Flowers there, and that's just because it's an area where I've taken a lot of wide receivers, kind of like in that range, try to get that last wide receiver before round 10 to sort of like hit 5 total or so, which is something that, like, I went through the teams that made the finals last year on DraftKings, and over 50% of them all had 5 wide receivers by round 10. I just think it's like a bare minimum here, and I'll break that rule if things feel right. But yeah, I would have taken Daniel Jones and then looked to backdoor stack him quite happily as the draft went on. But like you say, I'm quite happy with what worked out. I think I get the point about never being too excited about Kirk Cousins. But I think there's a chance that Vikings are a bit more pass heavy this year. I really like Jordan Addison, obviously love Justin Jefferson. And I think there's weeks where Kirk Cousins can be pulled into slightly bigger games. And because they get 3 points for the 300-yard passing games on DraftKings, he just feels like the kind of quarterback who could pick up 5 or 6 of them a season, which will really bolster his scores. We're 2 picks away. We've got 2 running backs so far in Jonathan Taylor and Breece Hall. In terms of running backs near the top of ADP, it's Brian Robinson, it's Jamal Williams. It's Jameson Williams even, so not a running back. Rashad Penny a little bit lower than Jamal Williams of the Saints. Do you want to look at running back, or do you want to keep going with wide receiver or tight end?
What I'm interested in here is hoping to see one player get back to it. So ideally, I would like to come away with either Jameson Williams, Zay Jones, and Penny. I would like to get 2 of those in the next 2 picks. So I'm good with either Jones or Williams, whichever one you want to take the risk on at wide receiver.
Let's take Jameson.
And that works for the stack. Jameson works for the stack.
I went Zay Jones because I've seen Jameson Williams drop a lot lately.
Okay. I was going to say that would have worked with the Cowboys week 17, but again, we didn't take Dak Prescott, so it's not as important.
Yeah, I mean, we can look at other ways to get access to that game maybe, but so now we're at a 1-2-6-1 build, which definitely feels like we're quite healthy, and it feels like this point in the draft where it turns to, there's plenty of running backs, there's plenty of tight ends in this area, and there's some okay quarterbacks who are around. It's definitely not an area of the draft that I dislike. But while you're here, people, if you haven't subscribed already, that button, it's right down just below. Click it.
Click the subscribe button.
Click it. We'll be at 850 before you know it. We are definitely going to hit 1,000 before training camp starts. And the sooner we get to 1,000, the sooner I'll stop whinging about it. Colm, so any other drafts that particularly stand out here? We've got no teams that have gone too kind of crazy at quarterback. Sometimes on DraftKings we do see
looking just at kind of unusual stuff. Team 10 has so far I can just see 5 running backs, 2 wide receivers.
1-5-3-1, which is definitely.
So I think like a board like that could be challenging. Like there's good. They've drafted solid running backs, but I think they're going to be leveraged at the position at wide receiver. There's a couple of teams who have gone quite heavy at running back. I think that could be challenging. There's a couple of teams who, the Dak Prescott team, for example, they have Prescott and Josh Allen. So there's a lot invested at quarterback position. So again, it's trying to find that balance at all the positions. So I do think there's, and I think, for example, the team drafting next to us, Deft Angel, they've balanced it out pretty well. It's a Geno Smith team now, but if you can scroll up, Tom, I think they have 1, 2, 3, 4.
Pure anchor.
They have
build,
6. Yeah. They have a lot of interesting players in there. Not all players that I'm, looking to target this season. And again, I'm not age bias, but there's the trajectory on the older players tends to tail off at this point.
Yeah, so
we're not going to get the guy I wanted in Penny here.
We're not going to get either of the guys you wanted. So we're back on. Aaron Rodgers is top of ADP. Then we've got Jamal Williams, Russell Wilson, Khalil Herbert, Jacoby Myers, Chigozie Okonkwo, Adam Thielen, Rashee Rice, KJ Osborne. Anybody in particular,
This
Colm?
isn't a very appetizing spot.
No.
I'm interested in Cole Kmet potentially at tight end. Anyone else interest you? Khalil Herbert's another name if you wanted to go running back, but
yeah, let's take Cole Kmet. He's not somebody I draft a lot of. And do you feel like with Cole Kmet and TJ Hawkinson, they've both got bye weeks in week 13, so we probably have to look for a third tight end. Do you feel
I was probably going to look for a third tight end anyway.
In terms of the onesie positions, do you prefer 3 tight ends compared to 3 quarterbacks typically?
I would, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's...
And I do think, I know we talked about this team, but it could be something that really comes back and bites you, 4 weeks into the season if Kyle Trask is the starting quarterback for the Buccaneers. But I do think this is a 2 quarterback build if you got, based on, it's a team that's going to live and die by that Buccaneers stack. So are you comfortable for the 2? Like I'm thinking 3 tight end, 2 quarterback build for this.
I'm completely fine with that because I think we kind of have to trust a little bit that Kirk Cousins is going to carry us for a vast majority of it. And the wide receivers, Godwin and Evans, will pop up with their big spike weeks and stuff. I think if we lost out on Mayfield, there's other stacks that we could probably add in that might just give us a little bit of a kind of get out of jail free. But for now, yeah, I'm completely fine pushing that.
And when it comes to the tight end, if you're planning on only drafting 2, obviously you don't want them to do the same bye weeks, and things like injuries can cause chaos if that happens and your third tight end's injured. But I tend to have quite a few tight ends in the kind of 11 through 16 round range that I do like. So I think based on having those 2 early running backs, that's basically in my mind going to give us an extra additional spot at tight end to play in there as well.
Yeah, I think you can talk like 2-5 sort of 2-5, 10-3 or so if we wanted to go up as high as 10 wide receivers to make up for the fact that we didn't. 10 wide receivers is definitely viable on this format. So we're 1 pick away now. Deft Angel, he's got a 1-2-7-1, so it wouldn't be surprising if he did take a running back here ahead of us. Let's see.
The players that I would be interested in are both Chicago running backs. Are of interest to me here. One of them does go. The other one is Sky Moore and Rashee Rice, and I've been drafting more Sky Moore than Rice, if that was the way you wanted to go at wide receiver.
Yeah, I haven't drafted any Rashee Rice. I could definitely go there. I mean, Aaron Rodgers does get a little bit interesting because he's 30 picks past his ADP now. Would you prefer Sky Moore over Rodgers?
Yeah, let's do it.
Do you, as a Green Bay Packers fan, Colm, how are you feeling about Aaron Rodgers now that he's left you?
I'm relieved kind of that it's over. Like disappointed that he hasn't retired as a Packer, but we understand it's a business, and he wanted to play on. The team have done, I think, what it's a bandage maybe they should have took off in hindsight a season ago, 2 seasons ago. I'm a massive Aaron Rodgers fan. I'm a defender of Aaron Rodgers. People that listen to the podcast often will DM me stuff like, "Have you seen what this idiot has said?" And I often defend it, being like, "You think what he's saying sounds bad because you see you're wanting a different side of the story." So yeah, I love Aaron Rodgers. Best Packer that I've ever watched. Favorite player of all time. So you won't hear me saying too many bad things. And I actually hope he does well with the Jets, because I'm a big Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall stan when it comes to fantasy. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, just it's one of those kind of, the relationship had kind of fizzled out and the separation had to take place.
And I think definitely as a fan, you get to that point. Like, I definitely had points with the Lamar Jackson saga where it was like, well, if things are just going to get uglier and uglier, you'd rather it was just done and whatever.
The only thing with Jackson is Jackson's still at the fresh end of his career. Like the Rodgers thing, it was either a case like, he would retire, had to be traded, or had to play. And then it was just much more awkward because they have Jordan Love and, he sat and sat and sat and sat. So it makes it just a tricky situation where that had to happen. Unless you want Huntley to be the lead guy.
I do not want Pro Bowl Tyler Huntley to be on the field at any point. He's a good player, but I think we've seen his limitations. So we're a couple of picks away from it being us. And yeah, team ahead of us with a 3-3-5-1 build. Wouldn't be surprised if they went tight end here or possibly running back.
I've highlighted a lot of the players that I thought we should draft. You hit me up here with some of the names that you like in this range.
I quite like. Well, I could definitely draft Sam Laporta, which gives us a little week 17 correlation and just be done at tight end.
It's done.
Tank Bigsby, somebody who I've drafted a bit of.
You don't have to tell me any other players.
Tank Bigsby?
No. Sam Laporta.
Sam Laporta it is. I noticed that you low on Tyler Higbee this year. Do you think that that's something that, because last year he definitely wasn't a pretty player to have on your team, and people are pointing towards, he finished like close to being a tight end 1 in total points, but we know that was pretty dreadful for the most part, and it was just simply because he was healthy at times, really. Do you have any faith that Tyler Higbee could be fantasy viable this year, or are you just kind of out on him because you're out on the Rams in general?
It's kind of a case that I'm not completely out on the Rams, but my enthusiasm just isn't as high for them. I mentioned earlier the Matthew Stafford side of things. It is kind of an aging team. We have seen Higbee have some moments, but for an age 30 tight end, it hasn't been like completely spectacular. And I'm usually betting on what maybe we haven't seen and we're hoping to see for the likes of a Laporta over Higbee. But I would rather Laporta and that Lions offense, which I think is going. And again, it sounds weird because we're talking about Jared Goff, who was cast aside by the Rams for Matthew Stafford. But I just think that offense is loading up with a lot of talented players. And I think that also, I just think he's a very talented tight end. So not a case of like I have strong reasons for not wanting to play them, but again, it's just players in similar ranges that I like a lot more than some of the Rams players at their ADPs.
Yeah, that makes sense. So
the one question I have for you, sorry, is in terms of, I've mentioned Baker Mayfield a couple of times. Where are we looking here in ADP? Just flip it over to the QB.
So in QB, Mayfield goes around 215. So really, we've got a long way to go.
Okay.
So, even
that's okay.
Trey Lance goes 20 picks ahead of him. Sam Howell goes ahead of him, who we could always consider if you wanted to. I know Sean's.
I didn't want it to be a case where we completely miss out. So yeah, that's us done at tight end, and I think if we can get Mayfield a quarterback, that's us probably done a quarterback. We still are sitting with 2 running backs, so we're into running back conversation.
I think so. I think we kind of have to look at running back here, really, because we've got 7 wide receivers, so that feels fine. Running back, we are on the clock. There's Devin Singletary, Roshan Johnson, Jerome Ford, Zeke Elliott.
They're the 2 names that I have interest in, along with Chuba Hubbard. By ADP, I would be taking one of them, and I'll let you pick which one you want to go for, the rookie or the my crush, Devin Singletary.
Let's go with Devin Singletary because I think the difference.
He's been now. When I say crush, it's kind of like 2022, 2023. It's more like an old flame. But at this ADP, I think I just want to dip in sometimes and get him in there.
Well, if you look at you talk about the difference between where Pierce is going in the 6th round down to Singletary in the 14th round, I think it could be very easy to see in even a couple of months if we start hearing training camp reports for Devin Singletary is going to run as the 1B rather than the 1 and the 2.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, we saw last year that Dameon Pierce ran out of gas down the stretch. And of course, that's not uncommon for rookies. But if the same happens again, and you're telling me that I could get Devin Singletary, who plays against the Titans in week 15 and week 17, and we're not expecting the Titans to be a good team, then yeah, I fully believe that when those games really count, he could possibly pop up with a couple of touchdowns. And, we've now got Jonathan Taylor, Breece Hall, and Devin Singletary. It feels like you know what you're getting out of those three.
The thing as well, when we're talking about zero RB, it's not looking for injuries, but injuries do happen as well. But when we look at ADPs, like there's small gap and big gap, running backs, and there's a big gap in that ADP, and they're kind of the ones that I'm going to be targeting a little bit. Similar with Roschon Johnson, not a lot has to happen for him to get more of a share in that backfield. So there's lots of interesting things there, kind of playing the opposite side of the coin. But I was a huge Singletary fan, since he came into the NFL. And it just never has fully clicked. There's been flashes, there's been nice runs, there's been good stretches. That team that actually you were talking about that came second, it was a Singletary penny team. And that was kind of their golden stretch down the playoff stretch of 2 seasons ago. So we'll see how that plays out this year. But yeah.
How hard do you find it to detach yourself from one year to the next with players, with situations changing like that?
It's pretty much always to do with ADP and how, like, there's some players there that I've mentioned, that I don't want to draft that, but it's basically always ADP unless I'm completely out on the talent, or I think that the player is at a point where, the trajectory is a steep slope down the way. So I don't get very much involved in like, oh, this is just my player for this reason. But what I do tend to do is I will have my guys and I will draft them heavily. When you're looking at exposures, they will be in the high teens into the 20s when it comes to draft time.
So we're back on the clock. Chuba Hubbard would be where I'd go here, and I feel like that's the pick you'd make. So let's just get that, because a little week 17 correlation with Jacksonville, which we've already got.
And just go back to our board to look. I do think we have a few week 7 running backs. I think we might have 3 out of the 4 now at this point.
So over here on the right hand side, you can see I've got the spike week playoffs for week 17. You've got CD Lamb correlated with Sam Laporta, Breece Hall with Elijah Moore, and then Chuba and Zay Jones, which these are all ones which have fallen naturally to us. We haven't had to chase them, but they're all the little ones which could pay off nicely.
But the part I mentioned was week 7. So we have Hubbard, Singletary, and Breece Hall. So we were talking earlier about the running backs. We'll see how it plays out, but that might be something that tilts you into an extra running back. But the other part is I would just potentially take the hit on it that week as well, rather than chase after it with another position if we're happy enough. So
there's a few running backs who go later who I don't mind.
We just don't want any more week 7 running backs.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be the case. So we're a couple of picks away now. We're at a 1-4-7-3 build. We've got CeeDee Lamb, Jonathan Taylor, Breece Hall, TJ Hawkinson, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, Jahan Dotson, Elijah Moore, Kirk Cousins, Zay Jones, Cole Kmet, Sky Moore, Sam Laporta, Devin Singletary, and Chuba Hubbard. So where do you feel like we go with this pick, Colm? Is there a particular position that's standing out, a particular player towards the top of the list?
I think based on what we've done so far, it's kind of best player available, but I would like to see if we can get a wide receiver here. I don't want Chase Claypool. Can you click on the wide receiver?
Yep. So there's Richie James, McCall Hardman, Greg Dodge, Josh Downs, Robert Woods.
Very ugly.
Yep. So 10 seconds away. Where we going, Colm?
We're in trouble here. Take Chase Claypool.
I was close to the wire, but we do go Chase Claypool.
No, I didn't. I did not want Chase Claypool there, but
no,
That's a
got auto
flat, flat,
drafted.
flat.
We missed it, and we got auto
Oh, we got
drafted Bryce Young.
Okay. We're into a 3 quarterback build then.
Which
I was hoping that Wendell Robinson was going to come back to us, and that kind of threw me off there as we rolled through and we were talking.
Yeah, that was a little bit.
That's okay. I think I would rather have Bryce Young than Chase Claypool in hindsight.
Yeah. So. Even if the Bears are 20% pass happier than they were last year, you're talking
that's
about
also
like
it popped up there for. We just need Bryce Young doing some dump offs to Chuba Hubbard in week 17 for that. He's added into that stack for the.
That seems, what if that's what you need is always the question. So, so we've got 4 more picks here, and we're at a 2-4-7-3. So, depending on what lands to us at running back, we could look there. If Baker Mayfield was still hanging around, we could go with a 3 quarterback build. I don't mind that. I'm not against it, but it's definitely not something I feel like we need anymore. But yeah, how are you feeling about this draft through 17 rounds?
I'm feeling pretty good. I would have preferred to have got a wide receiver there, but then there is no wide receivers there that we could have taken. So that was a problem. Looking through, it's very, very bare bones in terms of what is available, even looking down through the options further down as you scroll through. So just look through any deep wide receivers here we want to target that we just want to skip through to get to. There is absolutely nothing.
We're back on the clock now. So
go running back from it.
So running back, Chase Brown, Gus Edwards.
I'll take Patterson.
Patterson.
Yeah. Or Abanikanda. I'll let you go Abanikanda if you want as well.
No. Well, who do you want, Abanikanda?
I think we could get both. Potentially, we only want one, and Abanikanda has a week 7 bye, and we already have Breece Hall. So let's take Patterson.
Okay, Patterson's somebody I've not really drafted at all, but it feels like he's definitely going to be on the roster because,
there's some conversations, and we hear this every year with players, but there's conversations around him being used more as a wide receiver.
And obviously, we've got Patterson, and it's not viewing him necessarily as a handcuff to Bijan or Tyler Algier, but what Patterson offers you is an incredible punt returner as well. So he tends to be active on game days, and we can see him break those long plays. And I think it was Avery Williams, was it, for the Falcons, who tore his ACL last week, and he had been their punt returner. So it seems like Patterson, even at age 31, 32, should be a part of the Falcons this year. And I don't know, he's one of those fun players, but at least you enjoy cheering for.
The challenging part is like that might be a pick that doesn't return much, even though you're on about returning it. But what was interesting there is looking through, I mentioned I haven't drafted Singletary much this year, but we did end up getting into a little bit of a spot there when I mentioned the bye weeks. And the player that I would have liked to draft there was the other Bengals running back that was available. I think it was Chase Brown. Is that right?
Yeah.
And he also had a week 7 bye. So that would have been my pick. So it was a little bit of a conundrum there as to which way to go. And this is always the fun part for people listening and live drafting and doing it when if you're sitting and you're able to flick back and add all your players to the queue, it makes it a lot more streamlined. But that was that's a fun pick. The other player there that's after being drafted that I would have been interested in, there's Dwayne McBride. But
yes, definitely. He's kind of moved from the 20th round up towards the 18th round, but it still feels like he's a value. If you're in this draft with us and you're also in the chat, tell us how you were feeling about this as we start getting towards the end of the draft. So we've got a 2-5-7-3. We could take Baker Mayfield for that buck stack if we wanted, at wide receiver. A lot of the same names, really. McCall Hardman, Robert Woods, Khalil Shakir, who's an interesting name, Justin Ross, Allen Robinson, Devontae Parker, Tim Patrick, who have been drafting a little bit of, Terrace Marshall, Nelson Aguilar.
I think some of those guys also. Will we take Mayfield just to?
Let's take Mayfield, just because I'll be annoyed if somebody else takes Mayfield.
And it is for him. It is right around ADP. It's a couple of picks early.
Yeah. I mean, when you get into this range, the ADP, it's, you're talking difference between 210, 217. It's much of a nothing, really, isn't it?
Yeah, the challenge so far is that the one pick that I probably would like to, change to something else is the young pick. And that could be that could come back and work for us, in the long run. But the interesting thing is when we look through, there's like we joked about. Oh, we didn't joke. We tried to draft Chase Claypool, but when we looked through those names, outside of like picking up another running back, I think if we hadn't our 2 running backs that we had earlier in the draft, I think we would be looking there at, say, McBride, or looking at running back, Ty Chandler maybe. But because we were looking at wide receiver and Robinson went that short bit ahead and Mims went in the round ahead of that, it kind of left. There's not many wide receivers, kind of what I'm trying to say, that have been drafted since that I actually would want to have on the roster here.
So, I mean, we were a few picks away, but with a 3-5-7-3 build already, we talked about how, our active running backs in week 7 are going to be Cordarrelle Patterson and Jonathan Taylor. So, we could grab another running back. There's Juice Vaughn, James Robinson, who's now a free agent, Kareem Hunt, Michael Carter, Banakanda, which obviously...
Juice Vaughn does us no good because he's a week 7 bye. We have a lot of week 7 bye running backs left, you see. That's the problem.
Zach Evans, Pierre Strong, Matt Breida, Ronald Jones, which is week 17. Kenny McIntosh of the Seahawks. If you go further down, Latavius Murray, who's with Bills, Jermichael Hasty. So there are a few in terms of wide receiver. Robert Woods, Justin Ross, Allen Robinson, Terrace Marshall, Nelson Aguilar, Corey Davis, Dammy Brown, Devin Duvernay. It just kind
of... I think I probably would rather go wide receiver, but have you any wide receivers that are on the
Not
top
really.
list?
I mean, you could make an argument for going Terrace Marshall for the stack, but I haven't really drafted an awful lot of these. I've occasionally drafted Devin Duvernay for Lamar Jackson stacks, but that's about it.
Let's do Terrence. Give us a second. Terrence Marshall here. I'm just doing a quick Google.
He's still on the roster.
Oh, he's still on the roster. I know that amount, but I think, like, again, you're looking at players who have chances to make up depth charts, and I think he's right in that mix. Yeah, let's do it. Only 23 as well.
Exactly. I mean, yes, it's a different coaching staff to the one who drafted him and stuff, but it's easy to see how when you're talking about Adam Thielen, DJ Chark, and Mingo, that the competition
there's a chance to be
crazy.
Yeah.
And
no, I'm good with that. Interesting. We're well stacked on that Carolina Jags game now. So
yeah, I mean that could be a fun one. It looks like the kind of game that on paper could be fun. The Jags were really fantastic last year on offense, and as much as Carolina have a decent defense, you never really want to project too much year to year about how they'll play. So we have through 19 rounds, 3, 5, 8, 3. Looking at running back.
That really mean like we can go anywhere with this last pick. So I'm
100%, yeah. So Zach Evans was a week 10 by Kenny McIntosh, Kenny Nwangwu, who's more of a special teams player, but possibly sees the field more often now. The Dalvin Cook's out. I don't think I could talk myself into Chase Edmonds even in a Bucs stack. And then, it gets pretty grim as we go down here. Trey Sermon, few
rooms. Not good.
At wide receiver, Nelson Aguilar, who's been making plays over Ravens training camp, Dammy Brown, Xavier Hutchinson, Trey Palmer.
Show us the running backs there. I can't remember who was at the top, but there was one running back. It was Zach Evans. Do you want to go Zach Evans, or do you?
Let's go Zach Evans. I quite often have taken Zach Evans with my last pick, and it'll give us that kind of possible chance of maybe in week 7 when we just need somebody else.
That's kind of what we're looking at there, yeah.
Yeah, so that is it for us in terms of the draft. We've got a 3-6-8-3 build, which is the same build which last year took down $1 million. We've got CeeDee Lamb, Jonathan Taylor, Breece Hall, TJ Hawkinson, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, Jahan Dotson, Elijah Moore, Kirk Cousins, Zay Jones, Cole Kmet, Sky Moore, Sam Laporta, Devin Singletary, Chuba Hubbard, Bryce Young, Cordarrelle Patterson, Baker Mayfield, Terrace Marshall, and Zach Evans. In terms of teams, you see we've got Kirk Cousins stacked with Hawkinson, Carolina Young stacked with Hubbard and Marshall, Bucks, Mayfield, Godwin, Evans, and then a lot of players just solo. So how do you feel about it, Colm? Happy?
I'm pretty happy. I just want to check one thing. Scroll back up to the top again for me. I'm just trying to see here. I was thinking, yeah. So the one thing I would have been interested in now in hindsight is, we talked about Chris Olave. I don't think I would have stretched for Olave over Taylor. I was just looking at the Bucks, the potential of the Bucks against the Saints in Week 17. But I like to look back and think like, what in hindsight would I do this or would I not do it? I wouldn't do it.
I think that's more like the kind of stack that I'd be looking at if I was picking like third or fourth.
Yeah. Because if Taylor had been gone, I would have taken Gareth Wilson, and that would have been it. Like, but if you're picking in the fourth from say the 104, 105, and those guys are gone, I think it'll be interesting. But then you're probably not taking CD Lamb at that point either. So team kind of tends to if it completely skews what the team would look like, it makes it a little bit tricky. But I'm very, very happy with those opening 8 rounds, probably 9 rounds, even with Kirk Cousins. And then there was some challenges kind of down the stretch, but I still think through 13 rounds, pretty happy. The part that probably caused us a little bit more complications than anything was the running backs on the Week 7 buys. I think that threw a little bit of a spanner in the works, I think, from what we were able to do, even with that Patterson pick, for example, over Chase Brown.
Perhaps instead of Singletary, I know you left it to me to choose between Roschon Johnson and Singletary, and Roschon Johnson's somebody I've drafted in about 20% of my drafts. So I was looking to get a little bit different and go with Singletary, and perhaps in hindsight, that was one where, considering the bye weeks, it would have made it a lot easier after that point. But yeah, I definitely don't hate it. I think we've got a nice mix of, we've got 2 absolute stud running backs who could look like complete values, really, a wide receiver. There's a small part of me that is worried about Mike Evans having to play with Baker Mayfield, but I'm a big enough believer in his talent. He's played with quarterbacks who've been difficult for him before.
And on Mike Evans, again, he fits into... I think he fits more into the Keenan Allen category for me. Like I will draft him, whereas I won't draft Amari Cooper, but he also is at a very palatable price. But if it's a 1v1 Godwin versus Evans, like I'm much, much more in on Godwin than Evans. But I just thought at that point it was an interesting thing that we could do for the draft.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap things up in a minute, but while you're here, remember, we do have a giveaway when we hit 850 subscribers. All you need to do, hit the subscribe button, DM me a screenshot on Twitter, and we'll get you entered. And we're closing in on 850. It will not take long to get there. So, Colm, do you want to tell the people a little bit what you've got going on over Rotoviz and Rotoviz Overtime? Like, for me, it's one of my favorite podcasts. I always try to listen to it. And, I'm in the listener leagues with you because we're always a lot of fun.
Pretty much anything that I'm having is usually on my Twitter at Overtime Ireland, but I've tried to not spam it as much with shows I've done, so I've started posting less stuff as to what happens. But Rotoviz Overtime is the podcast. Myself and Sean Siegel usually 3 times a week. Well, always 3 times a week, but sometimes even more. This week, for example, I think we have 4 shows that'll be coming out, so there's lots of stuff to listen, covering all angles of fantasy. A lot of dynasty conversation this time of year, a lot of baseball conversation. So I would recommend if you would like to hear more of that and you've enjoyed our conversations today, head on over and subscribe to that. And there is the Rotoviz YouTube channel. I know people will watch this who maybe don't want to go to a podcast app. A lot of the stuff posted over there too at the Rotoviz YouTube channel.
Cool, yeah. And if you've enjoyed hearing me and Colm speak, you can actually see it in person in London in a few weeks' time at the UKFFC. We'll be talking best ball there. I think it's the first panel of the day. Very much looking forward to it. Looking forward to speaking to all the great people who are also going to be in attendance. While you're here on Sunday, I'll be doing a solo show. I'll be talking about some of the keys that got teams to the finals on DraftKings last year. Next Wednesday, we've got Pete Overzet coming on. After that, we've got a few more really good guests coming on. So do hit subscribe. I know Rich has got some really good stuff for Dynasty content coming soon. If you've been here today, really appreciate you. Michael, Richard, Chris, Josh, thank you very much for checking us out. It means a lot. Hit the like and subscribe buttons. We'll be back soon.